So let's talk about the new album. It's going to be your third album, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, man.
And it's called Inversion of the Unseen Horizon, and it'll be out on September 3rd. As you mentioned, the band is currently a duo, and you guys wrote the album as a duo. You mentioned the other influences, or the previous band members bringing in their own influences, and those other influences shading Deformatory's sound. With the band reduced to just the two of you, how would you compare the sound or the style of this album to your previous albums?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say that it's very comparable in the energy, in the way in which the songs feel when you listen to it. The only thing that I would say is different is that it feels as though the songs were written to be a singular song, in my opinion. So, whereas comparing to the very early stuff when we were just starting, it really was just a singular amalgamation, right? Like in the very beginning, like before we recorded anything, and actually the first three songs that we recorded, which are on an EP that we did called The Prelude of, and a single called Believe the Lie, those were songs that were written on fundamentally by only one person. And not everyone was on board with it. So the thing is that at the end of the day, the thing that makes the new tracks or the comparison between old and new is that it's 100% unilateral consensus. We're 100% on board. And when we wrote Malediction, that was also how we did it. So although we jam in the room and we're writing on the spot, when we finished doing a whole section, we ask everyone, when everyone was in the band, is everyone cool with that? Like, is this lame? Is this a weak riff? Is this a good part? Whatever. And if everyone's like, yeah, this is great, then killer, then we move forward. So we really want to make sure when we were writing Malediction that everyone was on board with and everyone approved every single section. And that approval process, when it was Neil and I, became much easier because we could be much more blunt and direct with each other. We didn't have to worry about hurting each other's feelings. We were both very much on the same page. We had written so many songs or so many parts that we ended up scrapping because we both were not in agreement, or we both, after a while, were like, you know what? Not as strong, not as good. And that actually, I think, fundamentally is what makes these songs a lot different and a lot better than the previous stuff, which is there's full agreement. Everyone's on board. Everyone's excited. Everyone's passionate. Everyone is like, feels as though this is the right stuff. Whereas before, we just kind of, everyone basically acquiesced in order to move things forward, right? So they compromise, whether it was their own artistic integrity, their own vision, their own opinions, to not rock the boat, to not upset people, and to just kind of move things along and progress.
Tell me a little bit more about how you and Neil write songs. Do you mostly write in a room together, or do you come up with riffs and forward it to him, and the two of you decide how to arrange them?
I wish I had the time to write riffs at home or anything like that. I'd probably end up being a better guitar player. but no, everything we meet up. So I guess back up, Neil and I meet up every single week, no matter what. You know, no matter how busy we are, you know, how crazy work is, how crazy the weather is. We meet up every single week, and we try to we rehearse the songs that we've already learned or wrote, and then we write something new. How a song gets written, sometimes it could be like something as simple as this. Neil or myself would be like, hey man, I was listening to this new album or this Angel Corpse album, and like they start a song like this, and we pull out our phone, we go to, you know, YouTube or whatever it is, we find the song, and then we try to listen to it, and then we hear how that song either goes or starts, and that usually will ignite an idea. So then we try to replicate or create our own version of that. And then we just jam from there on out. Right. So sometimes it could start like that. Other times, Neil and I will be, for example, rehearsing a song that we had wrote. So like a good example is on track 5 of the album, we write all the songs in sequence to each other, right? So when we finish writing, say, track 4, how we would start the next song writing, we think about what would sound good if we were listening to this album. Like, how would the next song start? How should it sound like? Should it start off slow, fast, with punches and shots, or should it build in? Like, we think about the flow, right, from end to start. So with track 5, because the previous song ends on kind of a bit of a slower note, when we were jamming that song, when it would end, I would just keep riffing. And that's essentially what created the opening riff to track 5 on this album, was just, I didn't want to stop playing guitar. And I would just kind of keep playing. And then Neil would kind of listen to the riff a couple times. He'd chime in. He would start to kind of come up with some beats. And the whole time we have like a Zoom recorder going on in the room. So we're recording what we're doing in those rehearsal moments, in those jams, those spontaneous kind of eruptions of musicality. And if it sounded great, and if we were like in it, and then we were like in the pocket and everything sounded killer, then we'd export that shitty recording and we try and listen back to it the following week and replicate what we did. And that essentially is how we write. We meet up, we jam, we rehearse. Sometimes we write entire songs in one whole sittings, and what you hear on that original demo recording is what you're now hearing on the album. And sometimes it took maybe a couple times to kind of piece it all together and refine some things. Very organic, very natural, and very kind of, for some people, very amateur and very weird. So, and we're cool with all of that.
Was the album completely composed when you guys, or when you added the lyrics?
Yeah, everything except for the bass guitar and some guitar solos. So, you know, obviously there's some like textures and elements that are difficult to do as, you know, just one guitar player in a room with one drummer. But everything from the riffs, the songs, everything were composed well before we hit record. Same thing with the lyrics. So we had everything written, ready to go before anything else. The only instrument that needed to get written was the bass. And I basically just kind of ad-libbed and wrote and recorded the bass at the same time. So there's a lot of parts and stuff that I had ideas for. I could hear in my mind what I wanted the bass to sound like, or I wanted, you know, like some pops, or like maybe an influence. I wanted it to sound like Cryptops, or I wanted to sound like the guitar. So I kind of already knew where I wanted it to go. And then I would just kind of come up with it as I was recording. But everything aside from that, even the samples that you hear in some of the songs, those were injected in the demos like after day one, because like we already kind of hear the songs like that. We hear them in their finality.
Talk a little bit about the lyrical concept behind the album, because there's a fairly ambitious concept. I don't know. I don't know another word to explain it, but there's a fairly ambitious concept behind the album, which ties into your previous album, Malediction.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's definitely a bit complicated, and yeah, I guess ambitious is the right word for sure. But we've had a theme going and a recurring kind of story from In the Wake of Pestilence, from our very first album. So for every new album, we basically just kind of dove deeper into the story and process of what happened on the previous album. So like on In the Wake of Pestilence, it was basically mankind is completely fed up with religion, organized religion across the world, you know, super original story, and then decide to embark on a mission to destroy, kill, and obliterate anything that has to do with that. And basically, you know, in the end, are looking back at the disease that they managed to eradicate. And then in Malediction, we explored, what finally propelled mankind to get to that point where they were so fed up and hateful of religion that they would go to such lengths to basically scorch the earth. And we explored the possibility that perhaps man was infiltrated by some type of demonic presence. And then we then took that a bit deeper and looked at, who or what is that demonic presence? It certainly couldn't be Lucifer as we knew it. It had to be something different. So we looked in Malediction of, could Lucifer, who was in biblical lore an angel that God created, could he have been a possessed angel, right? Was he maybe just like an angelic being that got possessed by a far greater evil? And if so, what is that evil? Like who possessed him? And then so we created this new character called Savael, and this whole kind of story around that original source of dark energy that infiltrated the angel Lucifer, that created what we know as the devil, and then how Savael's reign impacted mankind to create the carnage that occurred in the wake of pestilence, right? So those two kind of tied into each other. And then in this album, in Version of the Unseen Horizon, we took that story a step further. And, what if Savael, that entity that possessed Lucifer, what if he wasn't the head honcho? Like, what if he wasn't the supreme being? What if he was just a mere droid in this complex hierarchy of intergalactic light consumers? And then so we explored that, and that really kind of branched off into this wild kind of horror sci-fi spin, kind of reminiscent to Hellraiser and all that kind of stuff. And we drew a lot of inspiration from Clive Barker's Scarlet Gospels and all that kind of stuff, and the world in which Pinhead came from, and basically how all of that comes to be. So in Version of the Unseen Horizon, we break all of that down. How did this race come to be? What is their mission? How do they terraform or portal into existing worlds? What's their objective, and what's the carnage? So for this album, we had to create a whole world. And we created a planet, we created a hierarchy, we created names and structures and all of this kind of stuff. We really kind of just went to town on the narrative in order to paint a picture that we could write within. So that's essentially where Inversion of the Unseen Horizon is at. We see this as the end chapter to the what started in the wake of pestilence. And there's all sorts of things tied into this album, from like a hidden message or numerology perspective, like even the release date, everything is very calculated. So this is our third album. So we're releasing this album on September 3rd, right? So there's that. It's September, which is the 9th month. There are 9 tracks on this album. 9 is a derivative of 3. The portal in Version of the Unseen Horizon, which is called the Zulka, is a triangular portal. A triangle has 3 sides, so there's 3 albums. Like, everything is kind of like tied in to a lot of things like that. It's peppered throughout the album. So this is hopefully the end of those concepts and the end of that whole kind of story and saga. And now we could concentrate on some new demented shit.
Do you and Neil write the lyrics together?
No. Neil reviews my lyrics and says, cool, or I don't understand this, but no, I fundamentally write the lyrics and map out the concept. And as long as Neil's on board and he doesn't think it's lame, then I move full steam ahead. Yeah.